Hey, thanks for listening to my podcast. To best enjoy this series, you should start from episode 1 and go on over to brandonheld.com and check out everything my site has to offer. I have the podcast, I have the blog, I offer life coaching, and I even have a little life coaching course if you don't want to talk to me one on one, just to help yourself get started. So start with episode 1, go to brandonheld.com. Thanks for listening. Hello, welcome back to Brandon Held Life is Crazy, episode 9. Where I last left off at the last episode was uh, the beginning of my introduction to the next significant relationship that I had in my life. Um, but I'm going to say this. In some ways, am having a tough time going back to these memories and recalling these memories and trying to tell them as authentically as possible in what happened and how it happened at the time. Because, my wife, I love her very much, and she is the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. And, I hope that I can get through this and do these things without affecting her in some type of way, because this is just me trying to tell my story. And, there are some feelings that brew up inside me that make me feel bad about doing this, because I'm recalling these memories and I'm making these memories public. So, to Jew, I love you, and I hope that this, you know, is not bothering you. And if it is, please don't listen to these portions, because these are really for everyone else, not for you. So, having said that, back to where I left off. So my friend called me out, and I saw this redhead girl at the gym that I was, insanely attracted to from the outside looking in. I didn't know anything about her. She walked with confidence. She had the face of Angelina Jolie and the body of a fitness model and she dyed her hair red, not like crazy bright red, but like a red tint to her already naturally dark hair, but it made it look a little red. And so, physically, the attraction was just there. She was just beautiful to me and sexy. And it wasn't just me, and I'll get into that in a minute. But so I saw her at the gym the next day after my roommate calls me out, and I see my opportunity to ask her out. And I sit down next to her and I introduce myself, and I just come out with it. I say, hey, I think you're beautiful. I would love to go out with you sometime. And she just looks at me and she says, no, she's not interested. And I said, okay, thank you for your time. And I turn around and walk away, and I was like, ow, that hurt, like getting rejected sucks. I don't care who you are. Getting rejected sucks. As much as we all try to pretend it doesn't bother us, it does. So, I went back to a different part of the gym, and I thought about what happened, and I collected myself, and I was thinking, while I was there, I was thinking, everyone mistakes me for being younger than I am. I'm 25 years old. I have a son. A lot of people think I'm regular college age, 19, 20, 21. My whole life people have thought I was younger than I am. Um, So I was like, no, I'm not going to accept that. No, if nothing else, I'm going to go to her and let her know the whole situation. So after I collected myself, I went back to her and I sat down and I just started talking. And I said, hey, I know you said no, and I respect that and I appreciate that, but I just want you to know, like, I'm not just some other college kid here. I'm 25 years old. I'm divorced. I have a young son. I'm not just a kid, hitting on you. And then she seemed really receptive to that, and then that opened up conversation. And that conversation led to her telling me she had two kids herself, and she was 27. So she was actually almost 2 years older than me. I know 25 and 27 is two, but when you put the birthdays together, it wasn't quite two. And we just hit it off right away. It was fun. We were talking. And then, at the end of the conversation, she said, yeah, you know what? I will go out with you. And so, yeah, I walked away from that conversation super excited, went back to my, uh, you know, apartment later that day, told my roommate, I asked her out, and he was like, yeah, see how they are. You can thank me later for, calling you out, whatever. And so, we ended up going out and, um, we went out and it was a blast. We had a good time. We ended up, going all the way, hooking up and all that. And then it wasn't until after that she was like, well, I need to tell you something. And I was like, oh God, what? And she said, well, you know, I'm going through a divorce currently. I still live with my husband, but I'm going through a divorce. And I was like, of course I had questions. Who wouldn't in that situation? I asked my questions. She appeased me with her answers. And then, we just kept going. We kept, seeing each other, obviously not very often, right? Because our situations were she was a college student, a mother of two, and I was a college student, and I had Ethan, who I did get, half of the time during the week. I spent a lot of time with Ethan, and sidebar there, uh, that was interesting to me because I would go get Ethan and pick him up from his mom, and everything was cool, and then he would come spend some time with me. Sometimes I kept him just one day, but I'd still go back and forth and get him because me and his mother didn't live that far apart. Sometimes he'd spend 2 or 3 days with me. But as he got a little older, like, maybe one, less than one, I remember he was wearing diapers. I don't remember if he could quite walk yet. I don't think he could. And I would come pick him up from his mom, and he'd be happy to see me and he'd be ready to go, And then when I would try to take him back to his mom, this is the part that really got me. He would wrap his arms around my neck and scream bloody murder, like, he didn't want to go back to his mom. And initially, my thought was, oh, I feel so bad for her. Like, imagine being a mother and your son is screaming like that because he would rather stay with his father than come with you. And then, of course, later it made me have questions like, why would he behave that way? Is she mistreating him? What am I missing? What do I not know? Um, and I never ever found out that that was the case or there was anything wrong. I personally didn't believe that as a person, she would do anything like that because I thought she was a good person. Um, you know, so I didn't have any hints or, thoughts that there was actually any reason that he was behaving like that other than he just missed me and he wanted to be with me. And so I let it go, but it happened for months. I mean, months and months. I couldn't even tell you how long it went that he would just cry and scream and hang on to me when I would take him back to her. And I did not like that. I felt so bad for her. I felt bad for him, right? He had his reasons for feeling that way. Um, and it was tough. It was really tough. But anyway, so to advance my through the story of my next relationship is my second wife, and who ends up being my second wife, Angie. Um, Her and I continued dating, and like on paper, she was an amazing woman. Like if you were to put uh, down a resume of a woman, right, and I were to say to you on that resume, oh, get this, she has the face of Angelina Jolie. She has the body of a fitness model. Um, she has a master's degree, or she's getting a master's degree in chemistry, and she has a 4.0 GPA. Um, she literally can do anything she puts her mind to. She can take wood planks and build like a dresser you would buy from a furniture store. She remodeled the kitchen in our house, and I'm talking ripped the whole thing out, cabinets, sinks, laying down tile. Uh, we ripped out the bathroom of our home. We moved the toilet from one spot of the home to the other. She replumbed the entire home. She ran all the electrical outlets. She re-electrical the entire home because the old electrical wiring was bad and not good. It wasn't up to code. I mean, there were parts in the wire that they were literally like two pieces of wire connected together and taped, and it was falling apart. It was an old home that we eventually ended up living in, and like she was just super smart, intelligence wise, and also very attractive. And so on paper, you would think, oh my God, she's the perfect woman. But there's more to this story. Um, so after a little bit of dating, she comes to me one day and she says to me, I did it, Brandon. And I said, what? She said, I finally told my husband I want a divorce. I'm moving out. And I was like, what? You told me when we met you were going through a divorce, right? And she tried to backtrack and say that's not what she said, but I know what she said. And she told me she was going through a divorce, right? But I was so deep at this point, I just was happy that she was leaving him, and then, it was going to be a situation where we had a real relationship. But this made me question things. It made me question her honesty. It made me question her integrity. So I asked her, like, things like, am I the first one that you've ever had an affair with, that you cheated on your husband with? And she told me honestly, she said no, and I learned she had other affairs and she had been with other men. And I was like, so, what's different this time? And she was just like, I love you. I want to be with you. I never loved any of them. I didn't want to be with any of them. I want to be with. And so I didn't have the balls to end it. I could have, I should have, but I didn't have the balls to do it because I was so enamored by her beauty, and enamored by what she was capable of as a person. Um, and so I was like, all right, let's see where this goes. And so I did let it go. And so she ended up, renting an apartment literally right across the hall from my apartment. Like, I opened up the door, walked 5 feet, there she was, her and her two kids, that wasn't something she asked me if it was going to be okay. That wasn't something we discussed prior to that. She just did it, right? And it was just like, okay, I'm doing this, deal with it. And so I did. And then, eventually, as time went on, she asked me to move in with her. And so I took the difficult step of, breaking it to my roommate, Jeff, that I was going to move out and move in with her. And, he took it in stride, even though I know he probably didn't love it. And I wasn't happy to do it, right? Because I felt an obligation to him. But I also felt an obligation to the woman that I was with and I had loved at the time. So it was a conundrum. And she was putting a lot of pressure on me, saying, she can't afford to be on her own with two kids by herself and she needed help. And so, and she was really, really good to my son, Ethan, and that was also a swaying factor that led in her favor, right? Had she ignored Ethan or treated him, like he was this burden to her or whatever, that probably would have really pushed me in a different direction. But she was so good to him. She treated him and loved him like he was her own son. And so, of course, that makes anyone feel like, oh, this is a good person that I'm with, even despite the other things that I know. And so over time, as you live together with someone, you learn their other quirks and their personality issues, right? I mean, she was deeply insecure, which I didn't know because she seemed so confident when I didn't know her and I just saw her at the gym. She walked like she had pride, like she was just proud and confident, but she wasn't. She was deeply insecure. She she had high anxiety, very high anxiety, anxious all the time, nervous energy all the time. I just could never feel like I could just relax with her because she was just so angst ridden and just always needed to be moving around. She was a workaholic. She just had things to her that made me feel like, well, she's not the right person for me, right? As beautiful as she is, she's just not the right person for me. I don't know if I could ever trust her based on what I know about her and based on the way this relationship started. And I just wasn't sure. And so, eventually at some point we moved out of the apartment and we moved into a house together. And that's where, the things occurred that I told you about, ripping out a kitchen and a bathroom and just redoing an entire house. You know, and she literally looked online. How do you lay tile? She could go lay tile. How do you change the electrical wiring in a home? Boom, done. How do you do the plumbing? Just she would watch a YouTube video one time and she just did it. I mean, you have to respect someone that has that kind of skill and ability. How can you not? I couldn't do it. I still couldn't do it to this day. I don't believe I could watch any video one time on something that significant and just go do it. But she did it. But we had a lot of other issues, and one of our issues was how to handle children. I definitely felt like at that time in life, her kids were young, and I felt like they were brats. I felt like they got away with too much, the way they behaved, the way they acted out. And she just didn't handle them well. And I wasn't allowed to handle them, right? Because they weren't my kids. This was her words, not mine. And it was her job to take care of that stuff. And so, we would fight about how to take care of kids. We would fight about how to take care of exes. Her ex was still completely in love with her, didn't want to let her go, was inappropriately for our relationship anyway, contacting her and trying to maintain some type of relationship that was clearly above, you know, exes that had children together. And we would fight about all these things, you know, and she was very pig-headed and stubborn, right? She knew she was intelligent. She had a photographic memory, you know, she was smart. And so that translated into all areas of life that she thought she was always right. You know, you couldn't tell her anything. She was always right. And her point of view was the only one that mattered. And I'm not the type of person that you can be that way with. You know, I look for compromise in a relationship. Obviously, two people don't get together and they just boom are on the same page on everything, right? It takes work and sometimes hard work, but you have to be able to give, you know, in the areas that you can give and you can live with. You have to be able to give and live to fight another day. And if it's an area that you just can't give and you just can't live with, you have to draw a line, you know, and that person has to meet you either halfway or on your side of the line, depending on the situation. And vice versa, you have to be willing to do that for your partner. You have to be willing to meet them halfway, or sometimes you go to their side of the line. It just depends on what the situation is. And she just had it like, nope, I'm right, you're wrong. I do things my way. No one else is going to tell me how to do it differently. You know, that literally the words that she said to me. So it was falling apart. It became toxic really to some degree because we just couldn't get along. In a sense of a relationship wise, but we were also like the attraction was still there. We were super attracted to each other. We were like two magnets, two heavy duty magnets that you're trying to pull apart. And as much as we tried, I mean, we broke up multiple times. I mean, I moved out 3 or 4 times from living with her, and you know, we ended it multiple times, but we just couldn't break away from each other. And so finally, at one point, when she gave me an ultimatum, she said, you know, we either need to get married or end this. And at that time, things were good. It was a brief time towards the end where we were doing well and things were good. And she threw this ultimatum on me, like, you need to marry me or get out, right? And I'm living back in the house with her. And I was like, well, you know, I need to think about that, you know. And of course, she got upset by that, offended by that. And so I tried to let it slide and let it pass. And then, you know, about a week went by. And she was like, she approached me again with it. And she said, you either need to marry me or you need to go get a U-Haul and get out of my house. And she was dead serious, right? I could see it on her face. And I was really in a pickle. I knew I didn't want to marry her, at least not at that point in time. And we had been together almost 5 years at this point. But I also knew I wasn't ready to just call it quits and cut it off. I mean, there's a part of me that feels like I should turn back, you know, if I would have turned back time and called her bluff, you know, it was actually that, a bluff. But I didn't. I gave in. I married her, and almost immediately I regretted it. You know, we just went to a courthouse, we got married, and right away I saw a shift in her attitude, a shift in her personality. You know, she became much more domineering and demanding, you know, whereas before she was just maybe a workaholic, maybe doing her own thing a lot. And I didn't spend that much time with her. And she just kind of let me be, let me do my thing. But at that point, after we got married, she was pushing me like, okay, you need to get your career together. You need to get your life financially going, because I'm not going to put up with someone who's, you know, not doing well financially in life. And the truth is I had been struggling to get a career and get a job going, and I had shared all that with her. And I thought she was on my team, but once she portrayed this personality and this attitude, I was completely turned off. And I also still always had in my mind, I don't know if I can trust her. I never felt like I could trust her. I feel like if you have the ability to cheat on someone multiple times, what makes me any different, right? I never thought, well, I'm so special, she'll never cheat on me. No, I didn't think that at all. I actually thought in a minute when things weren't good and weren't going well, she would go cheat on me and she would find, whatever she's looking for in the arms of another man. And frankly, I never knew if the times that we broke up, if she didn't go do that and find that. She says that she didn't, but who knows, right? So it leaves questions. And I had questions, and I knew like this was just a disaster. This was a sinking ship that hasn't sunk yet, and I needed to get off. So I decided to move out and leave her for good. And one of the ways that I decided to do that was to join the military because I knew if I lived in the same area with her and I lived in the same town with her, we would never completely separate, right? It just wasn't going to happen. Like I said, that pull, that magnetic pull, it was too strong. We were bad for each other. We were never going to have a good relationship, but we also didn't have the power to break away. Neither one of us did. And so I lamented, joining the military to get out of this situation. I can't get a career going where I'm currently living in Dayton, Ohio. I can't, break away in this relationship. And, just nothing was going right for me there except for the fact that I had Ethan, right? I loved Ethan. I still spent a lot of time with him. He had grown close to her kids, which was also a difficult part of the equation. Her son was close to his age and they got along well, and they had a relationship, and so it all wasn't easy, and I was going through in my mind what to do. And frankly, it was my mom that tipped me over the edge. I was asking my friends and family what would they do if they were in my situation, what should I do. And it was my mom that said, look, you and Ethan, you have a strong bond. You have a really strong bond. And she said, that's nothing's going to break that. You need to get your life together. If that means joining the military and going and doing what you need to do to get your life together, then that's okay. Do that. You're always going to have Ethan. He'll always be your son. You'll always have that strong bond. And I listened to that and I heard that and I believed that. And so under that decision, I decided, all right, I'm going to go join the military. I'm going to go become an officer in the Air Force. I'm going to get a secondary degree. I'm going to go for a master's degree. And, because this undergraduate mass communications degree is awful. It's awful. It was a worthless degree, frankly, if you weren't going to do, like be on the news or be a reporter or something like that. It was just a bad degree. And I didn't follow that path. And so I decided I was going to follow the path of joining the military. And so after a short amount of time, less than 6 months of marriage, I had moved out and I was going to join the military. And that's where I'm going to pick up. I'm going to backtrack a little bit because obviously I skipped over a lot, right? I went from being in college to talking about a relationship and a marriage and a divorce. So I'll backtrack a little bit on the next episode and I will tell you some other things that were important and pertinent. And I'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening to my podcast. If you like this podcast, please listen to the rest of them and let me know. Go to my website, brandonheld.com. Check out my blog. Leave notes on my blog. Give me episode ideas, things you'd like to hear, or just tell me, you didn't like it and why. Tell me what you think could be better. I'm open to hearing all of it. So just go to brandonheld.com.